Welcome back, I'm Felix, and I am reacting to 25 lies you were told by history books, or by the history books. One I can think off the top of my head is Christopher Columbus did not discover America. Another one, the Pilgrims and the Indians did not get along. And what's another one? Well, there's a lot of them. But let's see what historical facts. Oh, Napoleon actually wasn't short, he was average size. Alright, let's see what we got here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's get going.
Here's a fact that'll blow your mind. Hitler was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize.
I actually think I knew that, actually. Can't remember why, though.
It's made up, but it's true. Sadly, a lot of stuff we assume is true is actually made up. The history books you read in school contain many lies, and I'm here to set the record straight. If we can't trust our history teachers, then who can we trust? I'm Mike with List 25, and here are 25 lies you were told by the history books. 25. Binding contract. The ancient and incredibly painful art of foot binding was designed to make Chinese women more attractive to male suitors. This look was desirable at one time, but I have something.
I've seen that, and it's gross and disgusting.
It wasn't the sole reason women did it, no pun intended. Binding their feet also made them more suitable for certain jobs and earning precious income for their family. Sitting down most of the day producing textiles was ideal if you couldn't walk very easily to begin with. Grim, but true. 24. The famous iceberg. If it hadn't hit the iceberg in 1912, then the Titanic wouldn't have sunk. Correct, but the famous maritime disaster wasn't entirely due to a collision at sea. For starters, there were issues with the vessel's bulkhead design. Bulkheads are designed to contain water that comes in, plus they strengthen the ship. Titanic's bulkheads were believed to have been too shallow for such a big journey, with water quickly flowing over the top of them. There were also concerns about the quality of the iron rivets holding the hull together.
I know something else, something had to do with the design in the bows of the ship. Also allowed the water to keep flowing in and filling up and causing it to sink faster.
There's far more to the Titanic story than an iceberg. 23. We can't let this one fly. You've probably heard of the Wright brothers. You may also believe they single-handedly invented the idea of human flight.
I know that's not true.
Well, not so. 9 years before the Wright brothers took off in 1903, Australian Lawrence Hargrave was suspended 16 feet above the ground while attached to a collection of box kites. And in 1901, Gustav Whitehead of Germany reportedly traveled through the air at a height of 50 feet in his own aircraft. Unfortunately, there isn't much evidence to back that up. It goes to show that the big names in history built on the legacies of those who went before them. 22. Lying about Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh's name went down in history for flying solo across the Atlantic non-stop in 1927. However, he wasn't the first person to cross the Atlantic by air, as some may think. This actually happened in 1919. The aircraft that completed the trip was a Curtiss flying boat named NC-4, which held 6 naval pilots. There were 2 other flying boats, but they didn't fly the entire distance like the NC-4 did. It took them 24 days. And yes, they did stop.
Huh, I actually did not know that. I had a feeling it was going to be something like that.
21. Einstein and algebra. Einstein is regarded as a genius. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a clean slate when it comes to educational achievement. He was hot on physics, not so hot on subjects such as zoology and botany. There's also a myth that he messed up his algebra exams, but not only was Einstein good at algebra as a teen, he was a general whiz when it came to mathematics in general. He didn't perform brilliantly at everything, but he was brilliant in his chosen field, and that's what counts. 20.
Yeah, I never understood that about math. I mean, you got to have math for what he was doing, so I always thought that was weird.
All's wells that ends wells. Legend of the movie biz Orson Welles caused controversy when his live radio broadcast of The War of the Worlds was broadcast during Halloween in 1938. The popular narrative about his adaptation of the book by H.G. Wells, no relation, is that it terrified the listening public. It's an amazing story, but it's just that. a story. Research showed that only 2% out of an already small audience were affected, so only a tiny number of people believed the action was real. 19.
That sounds more plausible.
Was Hamilton an abolitionist? Alexander Hamilton had a smash hit musical written about him. His story is arguably more well known than it's ever been. He's the guy who wanted to free the slaves, right? Well, he was, I guess. The influential founding father definitely wanted to abolish slavery, that much is true. But it isn't as simple as that, though. He's believed to have been less than outspoken on the subject when trying to fit into 18th century high society. There are also conversations about whether he bought slaves himself. Seems Hamilton didn't practice what he preached when it came to this controversial issue. 18. The boat that crossed the Delaware. George Washington's crossing of the River Delaware in 1776 is one of the defining images of American history. Defining, but not very accurate. The popular version is that he and his men rowed across in little boats as shown in the classic painting. This isn't the case. Washington stepped aboard a heavier boat, measuring up to 60 feet long and 8 feet wide. This type of vessel is referred to as a Durham boat. It's also incorrect that he made the crossing on Christmas Eve. Instead, it happened on the 25th and 26th of December. 17. Victorian Puritanism.
I never thought he crossed in those little boats anyway. I figured that was just a painting.
The expression Victorian values suggests a puritanical approach to society, as seen in the Victorian era. Turns out the history books have been economical with the truth. Saying Victorians were prudes is a sweeping statement. Back then, you had prostitution, plus a lot of working-class women getting married while pregnant. This contradicts the popular image of waiting until the wedding day before having intercourse. On the male side, gambling was a big deal. In fact, the wealthiest people were known to frequently take part in this sinful activity. 16. Dangers of the Wild West. Tempting as it is to think of Old West locations such as Tombstone being the scene of violent encounters, the truth is, the West isn't as wild as people think.
Yeah, I kind of figured that one. They're just good stories. Most of the Wild West stories come from movies and TV shows, actually.
Times were tough, but factors such as poverty and surviving on land were more important than whether a bandit was going to pull a gun on you. Famous historical figures like Calamity Jane died from pneumonia and alcohol, not bullets. But, as we all know, Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes. Thank you, Dr. Swift. 15. White cowboys. The Hollywood image of cowboys...
Now, this one I know. Cowboys were actually black.
Cowboys as exclusively white is inaccurate. You see, there were also African American and Mexican cowboys. They made a big impact on the scene out there. For example, if it wasn't for the vaqueros of Mexico, U.S. ranchers wouldn't ride on horses or handle them in the way they do. Vaquero culture, originating in Spain, had been around for hundreds of years before America as we know it came into being. 14. Echoing in eternity. What we do in life echoes in eternity, said Maximus in Gladiator. Since gladiators had short and brutal lives, they needed to make their deeds count. Or did they? Gladiators didn't die as much as people thought. The reasons for this were driven by business interests. Look at it this way. If you own a prize fighter, you're not going to casually send them to their grave, are you?
No.
The
I kind of wondered that, too. That didn't make any sense. I mean, you'd be going through fighters left and right.
average gladiator reportedly received medical treatment after a fight. They weren't just disposable meat puppets who died for the entertainment of the masses. 13. It's for you. The world has Alexander Graham Bell to thank for the invention of the telephone. Actually, it doesn't. The device is also credited to Antonio Meucci, an Italian who developed an electrical communication system. He did this in order to be able to talk to his wife, who was paralyzed. Meucci was gifted, but lacked the finances to get his apparatus recognized. He wasn't happy when Bell announced his telephone either. Meucci took legal action, though sadly, he passed away during proceedings.
Oh, man.
The U.S. House of Representatives acknowledged him as the inventor of the telephone in 2002. 12. Spartans were warmongers. Spartans weren't all about swords and conquest. Did you know they also had an education system which gave lessons in subjects such as dance and poetry? There was carnage for sure, but the warriors engaging in violent acts was more soulful than you might think. Also, women in Spartan society had the right to do things like manage property and take part in sports. Not incredibly progressive, but definitely an enlightened attitude compared to other cultures at the time. 11.
Huh, I didn't know that. I know sometimes in historical things they show the women manipulating things, like TV and movies. So really they didn't have to do all that.
Green Lady. The Statue of Liberty is green, though you may not know why that is. It wasn't painted that color. What you're seeing is verdigris, or a chemical reaction. The statue's exterior is made of copper, and that's reacting to the air. Technically, Lady Liberty should be a healthy shade of brown. Is there anything you know about history that may surprise the list 25?
I think I knew that. Like the metal is just, was it oxidation or something like that? And
well, feel free to tell us about it in the comments once the video's over. 10. Knights and Chivalry. Chivalry was the code of conduct for medieval knights. They were expected to obey its rules. But how did that work in reality? Well, it's different to what you see in some history books, that's for sure. An important thing to know is that chivalry was introduced to keep knights under control. What I'm saying is they already had a problem with violent, amoral behavior in the ranks. A group of thugs with swords being told to follow a bunch of complicated rules? That doesn't really sound like a good combination to me. Not.
yeah, a lot of people talking about chivalry's dead. You don't know what real chivalry was. It had nothing to do with men being nice to women.
9. Falling flat. Did you hear the old story about medieval people thinking the earth was flat?
Oh dear God. I think they're back.
Well, in that case, you need to be told the truth. For example, in 240 BCE, the ancient Greek geographer Eratosthenes performed calculations to determine the shape of the planet, and concluded it was a sphere. Many great thinkers were considering this very question centuries before medieval times. 8. The darkness of...
Yeah, I always thought about that. I mean, science has been around for a long time. Sure, they would have been able to figure out if the Earth was round or flat, and I would think they would have figured that out. Because if they thought it was flat, the charts and maps of the world, I think, would look different.
The Dark Ages. The early Middle Ages sounds like a dark time, but how dark was it? The so-called Dark Ages you've heard about are only presented that way in relation to the achievements of ancient Rome. Civilizations didn't fall when the Roman Empire did. Historians have been uncovering just how enlightened the Dark Ages were. For instance, they practiced astronomy and mathematics. It's also believed that our tradition of universities started life in this period. 7. Bloody Boston? In the late 18th century, tensions between American colonists and their British rulers were rising. The newly announced Townshend Acts added to this tension because they were thought to punish the colonists financially. Colonists didn't want to bow to British rule, and so violence ensued. During a public confrontation in Boston, they were fired upon and killed by British soldiers. The story of the shooting is described as the Boston Massacre, which suggests a bloodbath. In actuality, the casualty numbers are way smaller. 5 colonists were murdered and everyone else was injured. Terrible, yes, but not a massacre. The word was used by patriots to frame a narrative of authority versus resistance.
I can see that. We still do that today. Try to make something seem worse than what it really is.
6. Christopher Columbus, the villain. Christopher Columbus played an important role in the discovery of the Americas in the late 15th century. Of course, he wasn't the first to find them, as some history books state, because there were indigenous people there already. When he and his crew landed, they brought infections the inhabitants of the Americas had never encountered before. This proved deadly for them. He didn't set out to become a villain, but Columbus's actions led to the deaths of millions of people from disease.
Actually, he's wrong on that one. He didn't discover America. And he was into slavery. He was the villain. He was 100% the villain. If you look up more on Christopher Columbus, you'll see just how horrible of a human being he was.
5. Church versus science in medieval times. Without medieval churches, there may not have been universities in Europe. This may sound surprising to you. We're often told that medieval monks and other scary people from the period were strict in their teachings and that they didn't take a broad approach to education. Well, it appears the opposite is true. Theology studies included science and mathematics as part of the teaching plan. The church was actually more sophisticated than we give it credit for. 4. The Nile goes north. It certainly does. However, things become confused when you hear a simple yet totally wrong so-called fact. Think the Nile is the only river that goes in a northward direction?
No.
Well, if you did think that, well, you've been misled. It isn't the case that all rivers except the Nile prefer to go south. We don't exactly know where the story came from. Many flow north, and there are at least 18 major rivers that do this.
There's actually one here where I live that goes north. The Monongahela, it goes north naturally. And there are some that are man-made to go north. But yeah, I think people, it's one of those things where people, oh, river goes south, so they all go south. So they may seem like it's a phenomenon if it goes north. It's a rare thing, but it's actually not that uncommon.
3. Betsy Ross and the Stars and Stripes. Betsy Ross was an upholsterer who is credited with sewing the very first American flag back in 1776. The story of how she was
Actually, I don't think she sewed it, if I remember the story correctly.
asked to do this by the Congressional Committee is inspiring, but sadly that honor may belong to someone else. Continental Congressmember Francis Hopkinson, also one of the founding fathers, is believed to be the original flag designer. The exact truth isn't known. Ross appears to have been overlooked in the official chronicle of what happened. Her family have promoted her involvement, though there isn't definitive proof she was behind the iconic Stars and Stripes. 2. What geishas did. If you think the traditional Japanese geisha was also a sex worker, well then you need to do your research. A geisha was trained to play music and dance, as well as engage their employers and guests in conversation.
I think they were just entertainers, really. And I think a lot of them, no, in the theaters they were men, like if they were up performing. I think there were men geishas, actually. And a lot of them were, I think a lot of them were actually spies.
They're entertainers, not escorts. During the Edo period of 1603 to 1868, they were banned from becoming sex workers. So where did this X-rated image come from? It was due to a misconception that Allied servicemen had of geishas when sleeping with women during the U.S. occupation there. 1. Eton and Waterloo. The elite English school of Eton produced many notable historical figures, such as Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. He went on to lead the British at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. The Duke went on to say that Waterloo was won, quote, on the playing fields of Eton. This makes sense because he believed a good education led to a good soldier. The question is, did he actually say this? The quote has been linked to someone else, but no one knows for certain if Wellington delivered this classic line. Well, hopefully you learned a lot watching this video. On the subject of what we know about historical...
Oh, was that it? That was interesting. But yeah, the Columbus one, I definitely know, because my daughter did a story on him. Yeah, he was a horrible person. He did set out to be the villain. In fact, he was an idiot, it turns out. But as for the other ones, I say do some research. The information's out there. You'd be surprised there's a lot more in history books that we were taught is just flat out wrong or missing, and I mean missing a lot of information. Like the light bulb, oh my god, I forgot who invented the light bulb. My brain's not working. I do know he is not 100% reason. Hold on a second. Thomas says, I was going to say Edison, my brain froze up. He came up with the glass around the light bulb, but the filament was actually invented by a different person. I want to say it was a black person actually who invented the filament, and then he took it and ran with it. And also Edison is credited, Edison and I forget who the other person is. There's two inventors that are credited with a lot of things. The reality is they just made a lot of patents. They take other people's ideas and made patents out of them. They didn't actually invent them. But that aside, history can be interesting. But yeah, I do encourage to go get more information on any of these facts. Like I said, like Napoleon actually wasn't short. He was average height. And that was just propaganda to get under him, to get at him. But I'll leave a link for this. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and take care. Later.